Our next speaker is Kurtis Lockhart. Kurtis Lockhart is the Executive Director of the Charter Cities Institute and a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Oxford. Prior to joining CCI in 2019, Kurtis worked with the International Growth Center, WARC Africa, Oxford Development Consultancy, and the ELIMU Impact Evaluation Center.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So, as Eva said, I'm Kurtis Lockhart, Executive Director of the Charter Cities Institute. So Mark spent the last 15, 20 minutes, no, it's more like 30 minutes, talking about CCI, the kind of high-level model and the thinking behind CCI's work and Charter Cities and all that stuff. I'm going to spend my time going into a few more specifics and particulars about CCI's work. At this point, for presentations in, I don't think I need to make a hard sell that urbanization, rapid urbanization this century is a huge problem, one would say the defining challenge of humanity this century. Just an incredible demographic mega shift that we have to figure out a way to contend with. Fundamentally, there are logically two responses to unprecedented urbanization. One is we can expand existing cities, and this is absolutely a pivotal part of the tool set, and Solly and the urban expansion program here at Marin is doing fantastic work on this issue. And the second here is building new cities. So my point here is that I think an overwhelming proportion of time, of researcher attention, and of funding, like 99.999%, is dedicated towards this first option of urban expansion and existing cities, and very little is spent on this option of building new cities. And so CCI, we want to focus on this much, much more neglected option of building new cities. It's important to note here, I think as well, that both of these are happening. There are hundreds of new city developments across the globe right now, mostly in developing countries, and these really span the gamut. Astrid went over, I think convincingly, that lots of these new city developments are white elephants, or they do solely cater to or are only accessible to upper income segments. But there are some that are more effective at becoming engines of growth for large segments of the population. For those that were at the MIT conference, Angie Jo, who's here today, had a great presentation on Guan Industry City, for example, and there are several others. And so, as Mark alluded to, I think one of the big aims of CCI is to say, okay, hundreds of these new cities are being built right now. What can we do to nudge, to move, to influence more of these new city developments towards becoming engines for growth and poverty alleviation for all income segments instead of white elephants? So how are we doing this? I'm going to talk about two ways we're doing this today. So one is on the research side of things, and then the second is on partnerships, so working with specific new city and charter city projects on the ground. All right, so first on the research side of things, I'm going to cover a single project that CCI researchers and some partners tackled over the last year and a half, and that is this global new cities data set. Basically what we realized is, okay, there's this surge of new city building across the global south, and yet there's actually very little systematic and global databases that are rigorously tracking this phenomenon. And this has created, I think, a big problem in this space, because what it effectively means is it confines some of the researchers, authors, commentators in this space to writing about it from, they could cherry pick case studies that support their priors, or qualitatively or right from a normative perspective. And I don't think this is great to fundamentally move the needle or make progress on very important questions. So we saw this opportunity, and over the last year and a half, CCI, along with a data collection partner who's actually here, the Adrian Opel Group is here, we've been collecting this data set. This will be made public at the end of May, so May 31st, I think, Tommy, is the launch date, May 31st. So for those interested in the audience, you talk to Tommy about attending the launch. And basically, we hope for this data set to do two things. One is attract interested researchers in this question of how we move more of these new city developments towards becoming engines of growth. And the second is we also hope to nudge the overall literature in this space more towards an empirical and data-driven standing. Okay, so with that, a preview of the data set. So this is a preliminary snapshot of the new cities across the world, how they're distributed across the different regions. In terms of the other data sets that are out there, as mentioned, there are pretty few data sets out there. One at the top you'll see is the New Cities Lab up at McGill University. This is Sarah Moser and her team. The second is by INTI in Europe. And then the third is Harvard's New Towns Institute. And now we are adding us to the mix. So the big challenge with these other data sets is that I think they made a sort of trade-off. So especially the INTI data set and the Harvard New Towns Institute, yes, they have a broad time horizon, but that means in a lot of instances, effectively, they don't have a lot of data on the specific characteristics of each of the new city projects over that broad swath of time. And so what we at CCI did is a few things differently. So one is we went a lot further on collecting deeper project data, things like operational budget, things like project type, things like governance structure of these new cities. So we think this governance data is going to be particularly important, right? What level of devolved authority do these new cities have? Can they levy taxes? Can they raise own source revenue? And then second here, unlike the other data sets, we use a much more rigorous inclusion criteria. So these other three, oftentimes it was either opaque how they selected into the data set, or it was kind of ad hoc over the course of the data collection. And that makes it hard when you're trying to compare apples to apples and do a quantitative sort of study. Here are our inclusion criteria. So one is announced as of 1945, so post-World War II. The second is envisioned as a city from the outset of the project in the founding documents. The third is a projected population of at least 100,000 people. A school is a sign of mixed use. There should be a master planner and a distinct new city administration. So just a few descriptive statistics here. We found that there are 343 new city developments across the globe. The majority, the bulk of those are in Asia and in Africa. We also see that there's varying timing of these cities. So if you look at Europe and North America, for example, the bulk of new city building occurred in the decades right after World War II. Fast forward to today, and you see Asia and Africa, most of their new city building took place or has taken place more recently after 2000. And then these projects vary by type. So again, here we can see sort of common trends, but very large regional variations. So Asia and Europe very much dominated by the public sector. And then on the complete other side of the spectrum in North America, this phenomenon has been really, really private sector led. All right, so above and beyond descriptive statistics, I wanted to briefly also talk about a particular application that I think has a lot of promise. So I'm sure a lot of you in the room are kind of familiar with the use of nightlight data, and especially this picture comparing North Korea and South Korea. South Korea is this light, vibrant picture, which indicates a lot of economic activity. North Korea remains in darkness. So one of the things we can do with the New Cities data set, similar to this North and South Korea comparison, except at a micro level, is see the change in luminosity, right? The change in economic activity in and around these new city developments over time. And this can allow us to more empirically pinpoint instances of success and of failure, and then further investigate to learn more about the important factors in each of those outcomes. So just by way of example here, this is India at night in purple here. The red dots, can you see them? The red, I can't, I'm colorblind, but if you can, that's great. I hope you can. So this is West Bengal State. Hopefully you see them better as we zoom in. West Bengal State, so you see there's 4 new city developments clustered around Calcutta. So Calcutta is this kind of white or bright center there by the coast. And if we zoom in more, bear with me, it gets a little pixelated. But we see, so we have nightlight data from 2 snapshots in time. On the left is nightlight from 2003. And then we have on the right another snapshot from 10 years later in 2013. We also have, right, the geocoded locations of these 4 new cities and the announcement dates. So 3 of the 4 we see were established in the 1950s or 60s. But if we focus on this 4th city, so Newtown, Calcutta, established in 1999. So we have a snapshot from 2003, so basically right after this city was announced. It was a satellite city, right? So it's in a peri-urban area on the outskirts of Calcutta. And we see in this nascent stage, it's very dark around that circle, right? Beginning of the project, makes sense. We zoom forward to 2013, a decade later, and we see that this city is surrounded by light and it's bright a mere decade afterwards. So this indicates that something has happened in Newtown, Calcutta. And this is just a general application, a general example of ways we could use this data set that I think would allow us to objectively show that new cities like Newtown, Calcutta have been effective engines of growth. So that is the research part that I wanted to cover. I also wanted to pick up on a strand that Mark opened up around our engagement, our work with Silicon Zanzibar. So that is around our work with partnerships, work with specific new city developments and charter cities on the ground. So yeah, let's talk about Silicon Zanzibar. This is the island of Zanzibar. It's right off the east coast of Tanzania in East Africa. Here's the Silicon Zanzibar project, this little peninsula off the west side of the island. If we zoom in, we can see a few things. So the zone here, this is a pre-existing zone, as Mark said. It's about 10 minutes from this international airport, which is great for connectivity. It's about 15 to 20 minutes from downtown Zanzibar City. A few other advantages stick out. So it is, as Mark said, in the growth path of Zanzibar City, which is growing at a rate of about 4 to 5% per year. Zanzibar as an island is already has this sort of semi-autonomous status within the Union of Tanzania. It has its own president. It has its own cabinet. It has a lot of control over different policy domains that we care about. There is this pre-existing zone, some 3,000 hectares in size, so 30 square kilometers, a nice sizable, some would say city-scale size. It is on the Indian Ocean, right? So it's proximate to these rising global trade routes, et cetera, et cetera. And the other important thing to note is it's Zanzibar. It is a tropical island paradise. It's beautiful. A lot of people want to live there, as evidenced by hundreds of thousands of tourists every year. So if we hone in here on this red pin, the Fumba Town development in the circle, so this is the seed of the broader Silicon Zanzibar project. So this is Fumba Town. I think this picture is taken 2 years ago, about 2 years ago. This, you see, it's a large chunk of land available. This is the entire peninsula, so this is 30 square kilometers, and it's a pre-existing zone. And this is Fumba Town today. So lots of progress in a relatively quick amount of time. A few things to note about the development. Unlike a lot of new cities, Astrid talked about ghost cities, and those exist. People live here. The buildings are occupied. 98% of these units are sold. There's over 1,000 units. 500 people are living their day-to-day lives in this city. The second thing to mention is the developer's modular approach, right? So the 1,000 units that are sold, they were bought off plan. And then this allowed the developer to finance the first phase of development through those initial purchases. They're now, Mark and I were there in February, they're now building the phase 2. About 50% of the phase 2 units have been sold. Again, that allows them to channel those purchases into financing that phase 2. So rather than a build it and they will come approach like we see in a lot of these new city developments, this is approached a lot more on demand and a lot more modular, which we think is much wiser. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is Silicon Zanzibar has several fantastic anchor tenants already secured. I think the most exciting is called Wasoko. I think it is the fastest, or at least one of the top growing African tech companies on the continent. Wasoko is there now. They moved, I think, their headquarters from Nairobi, Kenya to Fumba Town 6 months ago. And Silicon Zanzibar has a bunch more of these similar types of anchor tenants on the wait list. So how are we helping out? I won't go into this. Mark talked about price point already, so I don't have to re-mention this. Just to reiterate, kind of, this is where Astrid's point about price comes in. The lowest per unit cost in Fumba Town right now is, I think, around $44,000 per unit. The average income in Tanzania is $1,100 per person, so not at all kind of accessible right now to these low and lower middle income and even some upper income segments in Tanzania. Mark said we're working with them to bring this price point down. And then the second is we are helping expand the scope of the existing zone legislation. As Astrid alluded to, a lot of zones focus, I think, inordinate amounts of time on tax breaks and custom exemptions. We know from studies those are not the most important things for a conducive business environment. The more important side of things is on the regulatory side, so streamlined business registration, licensing, permitting, streamlined dispute resolution, immigration, things like this. And so a lot more devolved authority beyond these tax and customs incentives are needed, and the next step here is to pitch the this expanded vision of this SEZ legislation to the president in the next few months. All right, so to summarize with a few takeaway kernels, there are hundreds of new city developments being built right now. CCI, we firmly believe that we should be doing everything we can to nudge more and more of them towards becoming engines of growth. To do this, we need a couple things in place. One, we need actual data on successes and failures. And then second, we need to then communicate these lessons from these data to more new city and charter city projects. And CCI is working on both of these. So thank you very much.